this teaching picks up at this point, and it picks up at a lot of points, but one of the points it picks up at is your breath, and says, okay, I'm breathing. What's going on here with this breathing business? I mean, yes, I'm breathing. I'm breathing even when I'm not remembering to breathe, even when I'm not channeling my breath properly, whether I'm directing it here or directing it there, whether I'm regulating it. The breath keeps going. So what is it about this feature of me on which I am entirely dependent? Without it, nothing else happens. If I'm not breathing, I'm not thinking, I'm not feeling, I'm not acting, nothing. I don't exist without that. So my entire existence is connected to the fact that I breathe. To me, this is a very potent point to recognize that everything is dependent upon my breathing. And what's more, I am not in charge of it. Despite all of the practices that you can develop to regulate it when you remember to do so, the breathing happens. And it is the breathing which enables you to remember to regulate your breathing. So this is what we come back to. There is this essential quality. And this essential quality of breathing is happening independent of any claim by me of being the source of it. It is clear. It is absolutely clear. I am not the source of my breath. I didn't put it there in the first place, and I cannot make sure that it's there in the next moment. It is beyond my power to keep myself alive. So this recognition, this fundamental recognition that there is something in the universe bigger than me, that in fact is me itself. If everything that I am is dependent upon my breath, I must be that breath. I must be. There's no disconnection between me and it. It is me, I am it. So this unification of myself and this living energy, if we call it, because that's what this breath is. It is a energy that enables life. It is the fundamental building block of living, without which there is no life and living, no movement.
That's exactly how you call it in yoga. The life force, the prana.
Prana, yes. So, what we're concerned with is delving more deeply into that and recognizing that this connection between the inner and the outer is not, in fact, a connection at all. That it is a continuation, a seamless continuation of the inner and outer, in the same way that a wave is a continuation of the ocean. A wave is the movement of an ocean. We are, in our being, like waves. We have this rising, this birth, this living in which the wave exists, and the death in which the wave no longer is. And this describes our movement. Now, we recognize in this teaching, we point to the fact that what we are as waves is ocean. that there is actually no point of connection between the wave and the ocean. The wave is the ocean. What we are is this prana, is this life force, is this energy. That is all we are. In a particular, that has manifested in a particular form, a particular shape, and one that's changing constantly, one that is in movement, one that is in flux, in which there are thoughts and feelings and actions. And the shape of these things, of this wave, changes as different actions happen, so that there's constant movement. And yet this movement is the movement of the ocean. And this is what this teaching is called Advaita. Advaita means not to. It's a literal translation. Not to. And what it's pointing at is what appears to be billions of different waves. You look around and you think, well, there's one, there's one, there's one. This is one. The computer's one. The table's one. All the people are one. They're all waves. There's billions of them. They're not two. So in essence, it's an incredibly simple teaching. Could not be more simple. In its essence, it's quite simple. Now, there is a complicating factor. You may have noticed this within yourself. And this complicating factor is what I call the false sense of authorship, or the FSA for short. False sense of authorship. Now, what the false sense of authorship is the sense that all human beings get at around the age of 2. And that sense is that I am not a wave. I am not a movement of this ocean. I am a separate, independent, powerful drop of ocean. And all the other things are drops of ocean too. So we have all of these drops, and each one is powerful and active. And this is the model. This is the sense that it's not all one thing, that it's in fact a bunch of different things, each one independent, each one separate. And that I, as this independent, separate thing, this body, this mind, this collection of thoughts and experiences and history and memory, that I, as this, am powerful. I make things happen. I'm responsible. It's up to me. And this is fundamental. You ask anybody, go out on the street, ask anybody, are you responsible? Do you make the decisions? Are you the one that is making things happen? Everyone you talk to will say, yeah, of course. Don't be an idiot. Of course. But the fact that everybody agrees doesn't necessarily make it true. And in this teaching, we're asking a very fundamental question. Is this sense that virtually every human being has, and has had since they were 2 years old, that I am separate, independent, and powerful, is it true? And the teaching doesn't answer it. Does not answer the question. It is not a doctrinal teaching saying this is how it is. If you think that you're a separate, independent entity, you're an idiot, because that's not true. What's true is that we're all one. It's not the approach of the teaching. I mean, it's the approach of some teachers, but it's not the approach of the teaching itself. The teaching itself is simply a collection of pointers pointing to the truth in the hope, I suppose, that this pointing will lead to a scene. There will be a direct recognition of the truth. That you will see through the claim of authorship into its inherent falseness. And not on an intellectual basis, not a seeing that you conclude through analyzing it that is true. That you can do like that. I mean, you probably did that already. We can do that in 5 minutes. Get to an intellectual understanding of how obvious it is. You couldn't possibly be separate, independent. That you were dependent on your breath. I mean, starting right there. Without that, you can't act. So you're not independent. Game over. But such an intellectual conclusion is not what we're talking about. What we're talking about is a deep and profound scene, one in which this understanding is total, where you recognize without any possibility of it being otherwise what is true.
And isn't another aspect of the teaching that that transition from the cognitive recognition of this truth and that complete knowing, the complete dissolution of anything but the truth, happens when it happens, and there's nothing you can do to bring it on.
Well, to the
You look at the pointers and you recognize it. And
now, to the extent that everything happens independent of you, yes.
Mhm.
By independent, I mean that you are not the author of anything.
Right.
So not only are you not the author of that, you aren't the author of anything, never have been, never will be. So that's, yes, that is, we could say the understanding, but implicit in that understanding is that all kinds of things can happen, which will can be said to bring about that insight. So there, you may actually do all kinds of things in pursuit of that understanding, whether it's yoga or meditation or coming to satsang, reading books, asking yourself, who am I? All kinds of practices may be part of this path to awakening.
Mhm.
And what my guru, this fellow Ramesh, said was that it is a notional path to awakening. And what he meant by that was that, in fact, everything is part of the path to awakening. When we talk about this notional path of awakening, is we pick out a few things that we consider to be the spiritual things, like meditations and practices and asking yourself, who am I, and going to talks and those kinds of things, are the things that we pick out and say, these are part of the notional path to awakening. But the understanding is that all of those things are connected to everything else. You can't really select those out and say, well, it was this, 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 and this, and this that caused it. Because they aren't independent of everything else. So now of course, in life, we do that. I mean, we form causal connections. We tell causal stories about things, and in order to function, we have to simplify. We have to make these kinds of linkages. And that's what our brains do. I mean, fortunately, they do that. So that we can identify like patterns of things. and function. And we don't have to relearn everything every moment. That we have, that we can put things together in a way in which we can utilize them, the brain utilizes them to function. Like if I switch this, the light goes on. You know, if I turn this little, push this thing, this is a little shortcut that the brain makes that we call learning, which is that pushing this, switching this switch, causes the light to go on. Now, in fact, pushing the switch does not cause the light to go on. And I'm sure you have at some time in your life pushed the switch and the light didn't go on. Because pushing the switch does not cause the light to go on. Pushing the switch is one factor in the light going on when we look into it. You see that 1,000 billion other things had to happen also in order for pushing this switch, making the light go on. But it is very useful, extremely useful, to be able to have these kinds of shortcuts in our minds and not have to actually think of the entire sequence of events necessary for the light to go on. Because when you start to branch out, there's billions of them, literally billions of them, going all the way back to the creation of the animals that made the fossil fuels that are burnt in the, in the electric plants. So that actually the reason that the light goes on is because the dinosaurs died. I mean, this is, when you get down to it.
And yet knowing that the dinosaurs died doesn't necessarily help you turn the light on.
That is correct. Exactly. So in purely functional terms, our brains make these kinds of cause and effect relationships. They're very functional. They're very useful. I don't want to dump on them here. They're great, but they're not the truth. That's the only point in this whole discourse, was that these are shortcut pointers. They are not the truth of things. And because we have learned so much in our lives, so many useful pointers, and we've got a vast storehouse of them, we often mistake this vast storehouse of pointers for the truth. This is scientific truth, because all of this, this vast collection of shortcuts that are constantly being built on by the human race, that we call science, are simply that. They're little shortcut pointers. They are not inherently true. And recognizing that is potentially very useful. To acknowledge that. And to see that the truth of existence lies beyond those simple shortcuts. It is far greater, it is far more profound